Pleasant day, everyone. For today's lesson, we'll be talking about biological macromolecules. And for today, I am your subject teacher, Miss Mary Rochelle Firme. And for our lesson's objective, the learner should be able to explain how the structures of biological macromolecules such as carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acid, and proteins determine their properties and function. Next is after this session, the learners is expected to be able to distinguish between carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acid. Before we proceed on our discussion, let's do a recall. As it is shown in the picture, what is in the picture? Do you still remember the food pyramid? Yes, this is the food pyramid. So what is the component of the food pyramid from top to bottom? Let's find out. First, the bottom part of our food pyramid composed of bread, cereals, and potatoes. So what is the main component of those food? It is simple carbohydrates. Next, on the second layer of our food pyramid is composed of fruits and vegetables. Still, it is carbohydrates, but it is the complex carbohydrates. On the third layer of our food pyramid, there you can find the cheese, the milk, and all dairy products. And it is mainly composed of protein, the building blocks of your muscles. Next is the meat, the fish, and other alternatives. It is also composed of proteins but also with nucleic acids. Next one, on the top part of your food pyramid, there is where the fats, the oils, and confectionaries. That is the part where lipids and fats is essential. On this food pyramid, it is suggested that we should eat most or in big quantity the bottom part of our food pyramid, wherein simple carbohydrates is at most. Next is the eat more, wherein the vegetables are there, or the complex carbohydrates. Next is eat moderately or in moderation, because excessive consumption can lead to diseases, the dairy products, and the fish and meats. Lastly, we should eat less, wherein fats, oils, sweets, and other salts are in there. And now, we're done with our recall and your preview regarding our lesson. Let's conduct a short pre-test. Are you ready? For number 1, carbohydrates contain carbon. Is it true or is it false? For number 2, meat contains protein. Is it true or is it false? For number 3, lipids are soluble in water. Is it true or false? And number 4, proteins are made up of nucleotides. True or false? And lastly, DNA is a nucleic acid. Is it true or false? And now let's reveal the answer on our pretest. Number 1, yes, it is true that carbohydrates contain carbon. It also contains hydrogen and oxygen. Number 2, meat contains protein. Yes, it is also true that meat contains proteins, and the building blocks of proteins is amino acids. Number 3, lipids are soluble in water. It is false because lipids are soluble in oil but not in water. Number 4, proteins are made up of nucleotides. It is false because nucleotides is made up of nucleic acids. Number 5, DNA is a nucleic acid. Yes, it is true that DNA is a nucleic acid. And now let's watch a short video clip as a preview for our lesson for today.
Go ahead and think for a moment about your very favorite food. What is it? Pizza, macaroni and cheese, chicken salad, sushi? Well, we all have different food preferences, but food is a source of large molecules that are needed for life called biomolecules. There are 4 major biomolecules that make up all of life, and this will be the focus of this video. Before we get into details about the four biomolecules, we need to talk about one very important vocabulary word, the word monomer. A monomer is a building block. If I had some large substance, the parts that make up the substance are called monomers, just like building blocks. We're going to talk a lot about monomers today because we need to understand what the biomolecules are made of. And we need to understand biomolecules because they're building components of life. So let's introduce the four biomolecules now and talk a little bit about their functions. We'll start with carbohydrates, carbs. Well, carbs are something that you've probably heard a lot about when people are talking about diets. You know, they try to go low carb, or maybe they want a lot of carbs. Diets always come and go. Pasta and breads are examples of foods heavy in carbohydrates. Carbs are actually a very important source of energy. In fact, that's one big function of carbs. They are a great, fast source of energy. If you are a marathon runner, you might want to eat a lot of carbs the night before a race. Lots of marathon runners do this. It's called pasta loading. They eat a big pasta dinner the night before they go out on their marathon. Now, carbs have a monomer. Again, remember, monomers are building blocks. The monomer for a carb is a monosaccharide. I know that's a big mouthful, but monosaccharides make up carbohydrates. Next one up is a diverse group known as lipids. Lipids are better known as fats, and they have two different types of building blocks. One type of building block is called a fatty acid, and the other type is called a glycerol. Now, examples of lipids include butter, oil, and cholesterol. Lipids, though, they have a lot of great functions. You might think, well, that's fat. How good can fat be? Well, it just depends when you put it into context. For example, you know those really adorable seals that you see on calendars? They have this fluffy white hair. They're actually called a harp seal. Well, they only look like that when they're babies. When they get older, they're not quite as cute. In their little baby stage, they actually have a lot of this hair that they're born with that keeps them warm. But over time, they have to develop blubber. It's fat, and it helps keep them warm. Lipids are great for insulating. Also, you might not think about fats as being related to energy, but fats are a great source of long-term energy. They can store energy for a long, long time. Say, for example, you wanted to swim the English Channel. That's like 21 miles of swimming. The fastest swimmers might be able to do that in 7 or 8 hours, but it might take a lot longer than that for the average swimmer. More like 25 hours, and that's a lot of swimming. Well, you would want to make sure that your body has enough lipids, enough stored fat that it can pull upon. Because after you burn off those carbohydrates, remember, carbs are the fast source of energy, well, you might not have enough energy storage unless you have some lipids on hand. Lipids also make up cell membranes, so they are very important for life because all living things are made of cells. Of course, an excessive amount of lipids could be a bad thing for your health. Remember, it's all about moderation. Okay, next, proteins. Now, when you hear about proteins, a lot of times you might think about power bars. They say they have a lot of protein in them and that they help with muscle building. Well, protein is great for muscle building. Examples of foods that are high in protein include meats and many types of beans. The monomers of protein are amino acids. So sometimes you see these labels that say, this has 20 amino acids in this food. And really, they're just trying to say that it has protein. Because proteins are made of amino acids, so that's just some fancy advertising for you. But in addition to being important for muscle development, protein is also very important for other functions, such as working in the immune system and acting as enzymes. Remember, enzymes are made of proteins, so proteins are important for the body. Now, when we start talking about genes, the DNA genes, not the genes you wear, the DNA codes for proteins that are very important for structure and function in the body. The last biomolecule is known as a nucleic acid. Nucleic acids include DNA and RNA, which we'll get to when we get to genetics. They have a monomer called a nucleotide. That's going to be an easy one for you to remember because nucleotide sounds a lot like nucleic acid. And if considering DNA and RNA, both of these are involved in genetic information for the coding of your traits. They are found in a lot of your food because whenever you eat something that came from something once living, it can still contain the DNA. For example, when you eat a strawberry, you're actually consuming all the cells that make up that strawberry. And in the nucleus of all those strawberry cells is DNA. Plants and animals both have DNA. In fact, any type of life must contain nucleic acids to direct the cell's activities. So we just powered through introducing the 4 biomolecules by providing examples, exploring their monomers, and giving some general functions. One last very important part to mention is the structure of these biomolecules. Understanding the structure can help with predicting their properties and easily being able to identify them. One thing I like to tell students to do is to write the 4 biomolecules in the same order that we went through: carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Then remember this mnemonic device that goes with these 4 biomolecules: cho, cho, chon, chomp. Instead of chomp at the end with an M, it's chomp at the end with an N. The C stands for carbon, the H stands for hydrogen, the O for oxygen. So carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids all have that CHO in there. It's just that proteins and nucleic acids also have an N, which is nitrogen. And nucleic acids additionally have a P, which is for phosphorus. So again, CHO, CHO, CHON, CHOMP, the major elements in the 4 biomolecules. Now, these elements are arranged differently in the 4 biomolecules. It's important to explore the arrangement of the elements in biomolecules because the structure of that arrangement greatly impacts the biomolecule function. So, to the Google to discover some biomolecule arrangement illustrations. Well, that's it for the Amoeba Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.
For today's discussion, we will be talking about biological macromolecules. From the word itself, macromolecules, it means large organic molecule, mainly carbohydrates, protein, lipids, and nucleic acid. Their main function is as energy storage and protection. And now let's talk about macromolecules. Number 1 is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the most abundant macromolecules of life and the primary source of energy in the human body. Carbohydrates is also called saccharides. And saccharides are classified into 2, the simple and complex saccharides. The simple carbohydrates or sugars are the monosaccharides and disaccharides, while the complex saccharides or complex sugars are the polysaccharides. Again, carbohydrates is composed of mainly carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And for its functions and plant structure, we will see carbohydrates as the cellulose or the fiber on plants. Fibers are insoluble by the human body, but it aids in digestion. Next is for immediate energy needs. Carbohydrates are broken down into glucose. Glucose is the available sugar in the blood, and glucose is used to make ATP or the adenosine triphosphate. ATP is used as the key for glucose absorption in the blood. And for the long-term use, carbohydrates is transformed into glycogen wherein it is stored in liver and muscles. Carbohydrates are classified into 2, simple and complex carbohydrates. In simple carbohydrates, there is monosaccharide and disaccharide. Under monosaccharide is our glucose, galactose, and fructose. The glucose is the sugar found in dextrose and in our blood, wherein the galactose is the sugar found in milk, and the fructose is the sugar that is found in fruits and honey. And for disaccharides, disaccharide is composed of maltose, which is a combination of glucose and another glucose and is commonly found in malt. Number 2 is lactose, a combination of glucose and galactose, and it commonly found in milk products or dairy products. And next is the sucrose, or a glucose and a fructose, which is commonly found as our table sugar. Next is the polysaccharide or the complex carbohydrates. Polysaccharides is commonly found in plant sources like the starch or the amylose, amylopectin, and cellulose. Glycogen is also an example of polysaccharide. It is stored in our liver and muscle and commonly found in animal food products. We have here a simple picture illustration of how carbohydrates is transformed in the human body. Here we have a plant source of carbohydrates where it contains glucose, cellulose, and starch. And when it is added into our daily meal or the vegetables in our daily meal, it is converted into glucose and glycogen in our body. Second, on our biological macromolecules is the lipids or the fat we found on food, otherwise known as triglycerides. Triglycerides or lipids is an important nutrient in our body, but excessive consumption of fats like trans fat and saturated fats can lead into heart diseases or obesity. Under lipids, we have good and bad fats. Number 1 or type of fats is the unsaturated fats. It is commonly found in plant and fish food products. It is also called beneficial or healthy fats that is good for the heart. Types of unsaturated fats are number 1, monosaturated fats found in avocados, olive, peanut, and canola oil. Next is the polysaturated. It is commonly found in vegetable oils that we use for cooking. Next one is the omega-3 fatty acids, a type of polysaturated fat found in oily fish like tuna and salmon. Number 2 type of triglyceride is the saturated fats. It is usually solid at room temperature. Unlike the unsaturated fats, it is remaining liquid at room temperature. In general, the common source of saturated fat is animal food products like meat, poultry, egg yolks, cheese, milk, ice cream, and many others. Here is a simple diagram of how lipid function and its metabolism. After lipid is ingested or after the consumption of fats in our food, it is indigestion and absorption. It is converted into lipoproteins, which is excreted in our feces. It is synthesized from carbohydrates and proteins. It also oxidized for energy use and converted into brain and nerve tissues. Other terms are in the other form of lipid ingestion, it is stored as adipose tissue, which is also a stored energy reserve. It helps in insulation or maintaining the body temperature and support the vital organs. It also generates heat to prevent us from being cold. Our next macromolecule is proteins. Like how all we are aware of the proteins, it is the building blocks of our muscles. And the monomer of protein is amino acid and its polymer is the protein itself. Its main element is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And for its function, it controls the reaction rates in the cell process. It also important in the building of muscles and bones in our body. It is also the physical expression of the DNA. Yes, our DNA is composed of protein. The double helix strand of the DNA is mainly composed of proteins. Under protein is the enzyme. Most of our enzymes in the body is composed of proteins, and for its function, it serves as catalyst. Like what we discussed in our previous lesson, catalyst speeds up chemical reaction. So, example is the absorption. An enzyme is needed for the fast absorption of nutrients in our body. Also like in excretion or the ejection of our waste products. Common proteins are found in our muscles. Under the skin or in the skin, hair, fingernails, and claws, the example of protein is collagen and keratin. And under enzyme, there is pepsin, digestive enzyme in the stomach, insulin or the hormone that controls the blood sugar levels. Lastly, on our biological macromolecule is the nucleic acid, a complex biomolecule that stores cellular information in the form of code or our genetic makeup. The two types of nucleic acid is the DNA, the deoxyribonucleic acid, or the RNA, the ribonucleic acid. Its main component is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. As it is said, there are two types of nucleic acid, the DNA and the RNA. The DNA is the genetic material of the cell and is found in the nucleus. It replicates itself in order for cell division to occur. It also provides instructions for the protein synthesis. If we can still remember on biology, the double helix that holds the DNA is composed of protein. And the RNA have three major types, which is the messenger, the transfer, and the ribosome. And each type have different function. As for the key points, nucleic acid is composed of a nucleotide. Nucleotides is mainly a phosphate group, sugar, and nitrogen base. DNA stores hereditary information passed from generation to generation, and the RNA helps in the manufacture of proteins. As for nucleic acid food source, it is commonly found in vitamins and minerals. So anything that we can think that is high in vitamins and minerals is a source of nucleic acid. Example is the fruits, vegetables, meats, and syempre, no junk food. Now, let us evaluate ourselves if we have learned something from our lesson. Let us answer the activities provided on your modules. Number 1 activity is titled Amazing Lunch. The questions are indicated on your answer sheets. Activity number 2 will be the assessment in multiple choice type provided in your answer sheets. Next activity will be to create our own food pyramid related on our BMI. So we will compute our BMI and the necessary needs to be indicated in our own food pyramid. On a separate sheet of paper, we will write the following. Number 1, explain the importance and functions of biological macromolecules in the human body. Number 2, we will make a list of biological macronutrients found on our daily meal. And now we reach the end of our discussion. I hope you learned a lot from this presentation, and don't forget to have